Hello, my name is Nick McPhee, and this is going to be the first of a series of 4 videos showing some very introductory material on writing shell scripts, using Git and GitHub to manage a project, and using the BATS testing tool to provide testing support for the writing of shell scripts. This is going to assume, if you want to play along, that you have a fork of the git-bats-demo repository. I'll have a link to this in the text of the video, information about the video. I have actually already done this. I've got a fork. This was done in the previous video, and so I've got a fork of the project that I'll be using to capture the work that I'm doing. And I've already cloned that here into my account on one of the computers in our lab. And this is the copy that I'll be working with. So I have the BATS testing file, I have the license file, the README, and the test data. And these are the 4 files that we see here in the GitHub repo. So I've forked it, I've cloned it, and now I'm going to work with it. The 4 parts, this first part is going to be just a quick introduction to BATS as a testing tool and what the problem is that we're trying to solve. The second video is going to show how to create an executable shell script and get us to a point where we're ready to actually sort of work on the problem. And then the third video is going to be getting through a few of the simple tests and seeing some of the commands that we might use in solving the problem. And then the last video is going to be actually solving the problem. So first, let's actually see what the problem is. So the idea here is that we're going to write a script called countsuccesses.sh, and it's going to take some compressed tar file. So for example, test data files.tgz. TGZ is the kind of standard extension for a compressed tar file. GZ stands for gzip, the compression utility, and T for tar. So our script countSuccesses should take as a command line argument the name of a compressed tar file. It should extract the files from that into some scratch space. It should then go through and count how many of those contain the word success and how many of those files contain the word failure. And then it should print some sort of response that tells us there were this many successes and this many failures. Idea being, imagine that you're working with a researcher in another field. They have a piece of lab equipment that generates these little files indicating whether particular replications succeeded or failed, for example, and they would like to have help doing the counting so that they're not having to do it by hand. You're writing a script to help them do that. Now, that's all well and good. It would be nice when writing the script if we have some kind of testing support to give us some idea of whether we have done the right thing, we've gone down the right road. BATS is a shell testing tool that we're going to use here to support the development of our script. I've written a set of BATS tests in advance that are part of the repository, and assuming you've got BATS installed on your machine, it's not part of most standard installations. It should be installed in our labs. It's easy to install if you have a Unix box or a Mac. You can install it with Brew on Mac OS. You can install it with most package managers in most Linux installations. If you're in Windows, life's a little more complicated. I'm not going to get into that here. But we do have BATS on this machine. So if I say which BATS, it says that BATS is in user bin BATS. And so I can actually run the tests by indicating that I'm running the executable BATS, and I'm going to hand it this file of tests. and we see that there are 9 tests, 8 of which fail, 1 succeeds kind of for the wrong reasons. Turns out that when we try to run the script and it doesn't exist, that generates exactly 1 line of output, and so it thinks, oh look, you've passed the 1 line of output test, but that's only by accident. So you can see that these tests walk us through what it is we need to do. The first says that we need to have a file called countsuccesses.sh. We don't at the moment. Then the next says that that file needs to be executable. And the next says that file needs to run without generating an error. And then that file needs to generate 1 line of output. And then it needs to print out a line having the right form. It has to have the right number of successes, the right number of failures. It needs to produce the right output for files.tgz, and it needs to provide the right output for a second collection of files, which I rather unimaginably named second fileset.tgz. And the hope is if we get through all of these, then we will not have a guarantee that our script is correct, because tests can never provide an absolute guarantee. There's always the possibility of a case we didn't consider. You would need a proof for something like that, and tests do not constitute a proof. But we would have some confidence that we're heading in the right direction. The last 2 tests also give us an idea of what we are expected to return or to print. We are expected to print a line that says there were however many successes and however many failures. And so that's the goal of the script that we are trying to write. In this series of videos, I'm not going to go over the details of how the BATS tests themselves work. That's a little sort of out of our league here, but I will quickly show what they look like, because it might be useful if a test fails and you want to go back and try to figure out what's going on. If we look at the collection of tests, you can see that there is a fair number of comments, in that each test has a set of comments that say something about what exactly that test is trying to accomplish. And in some cases, it may give you some suggestions on what you need to do if that test fails. So for example, the first test says at test, that's the BATS way of saying this is a test. And then a string that is simply a description of the test, and that's what gets printed out when we run it. The shell script countsuccesses.h exists. And then the body of the test in curly braces. And then the body can have as many commands as we want. In this case, we just want to have a check that there is a file called countsuccesses.sh. In Bash, tests can be indicated using square brackets, and this can be used in things like if tests, but here we're just doing a test, so we don't need to wrap it with something like an if. We can just have the test that we're checking. And so this says, is there a file, that's what the -f means, whose name is countsuccesses.sh. If that succeeds, if there is a file with that name, this test will succeed, and we'll get a little check mark when we run BATS. If there is no file with this name, then this test will fail, and we'll get the red X that we saw before. So that gives us sort of a quick idea of what these tests look like. And again, if a test fails and you're not sure what that means, feel free to look in here and see if the comments before that test perhaps provide some useful feedback. Okay, so that's going to wrap up this video. I'm going to stop here. The next video will actually create the shell, an empty shell script, and get it so that it's executable and does, essentially nothing but has the framework in place. So we'll do that in the next video. If you've got any questions, obviously let me know. Thank you very much.